Welcome back. If you're a member of the Jewish community here on the Suncoast, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Republican or Democrat, Israel and defending its right to exist has always been a unifying cause, and it still is. But there is a growing divide among American Jews when it comes to the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the lack of progress when it comes to peace with the Palestinians, President Trump's unshakable support for Netanyahu, and even the move this week of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. And joining us for more are Jeff Hunting, Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Sinai, Howard Teblowitz, the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Sarasota Manatee, and Mark Weston, the author of Prophets to Princes. And we should note that we did want to have someone from the Muslim community here tonight, but it is the beginning of Ramadan, so we'll have to talk to folks from that community on another day. But obviously this has been a very eventful week after an eventful couple of months when President Trump first announced that he was moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And Mark, let me start with you and ask you why that is such a significant move.
I'm sorry, why is what
moving
the embassy?
The embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem?
It makes the U.S. no longer a neutral party between Israel and Palestine. This is something Israel has wanted for a long time. I think it's a lost opportunity. It should have come at the end of a long peace negotiation. Instead, it's essentially a gift to Prime Minister Netanyahu. And there was no mention during all of this ceremony of the fact that 38% of Jerusalem is Palestinian, and that perhaps someday Jerusalem can also be a capital city of a Palestinian state. There was no mention of this and no meetings with Palestinians. So it was all just very one-sided.
Just a little history for the folks listening to this. The U.S. position on moving the embassy to Jerusalem dates back to the 1990s, when I think it was Bob Dole who got Congress to pass such a law. But in the intervening years, every president, Republican and Democrat, has waived that requirement up until now. Rabbi, let me get your reaction to this. Rick Jacobs is the president of the URJ, the Reform Movement, and he said in response to this, "We also celebrate the opening of the embassy as an affirmation of the deep and lasting ties between the U.S. and Israel. However, we remain very much aware of the lack of progress towards a long-term just solution for Israelis and Palestinians. We hope the administration's statements today are part of the serious effort to bring both sides back to the table." Do you think that's going to take place?
Do I think we're going to be back at the table? If that's going to happen, it won't be because of a move of the embassy. I mean, I have to echo Mark West, who just said a few minutes ago. This was going to be something that we could use as a chip for negotiations. And my question also would be, what did we gain from this? We certainly in the United States, but also as a lover of the state of Israel. What did Israel really gain? And I'm not sure whether it gained anything.
Howard, I said at the outset this is difficult for the Jewish community here on the Suncoast, because in any given synagogue, whether it is Reform or Conservative or Orthodox, Jews do not speak with one voice. They don't. There's a range of things. How difficult has it been in terms of synagogue life these days?
I'm sure. Look, I'm not a rabbi, but it is difficult because there is differences of opinion. However, I will differ with my colleagues here that I actually Googled before I came here. I think there's 205 countries in the world. There's one country that there's a discussion about its capital. Since 1948, Jerusalem's been the capital of Israel. It's the capital of Israel. So there may be differences of opinion about whether they recognize moving the embassies there or not, but I think most Jews do believe that Jerusalem is simply the capital of Israel, and it is the capital of Israel. So this is an interesting political issue, not an issue of fact. The fact is Jerusalem is the capital of Israel.
And maybe we're going to have to continue this in the next segment, but is part of the issue here is that while most Jews believe that, most American Jews support that, they're concerned that these kinds of moves and other things that the Israeli government does, that Israel is losing the PR war internationally, and that in the long run threatens the state of Israel.
I think, again, Israel's been losing the PR war for years. If Israel loses, then I think the PR will be better, but except when Israel loses, Israel's done. Therefore, 1967 is not going to happen again. That's one of the reasons why I understand there's a PR issue, but the reality is that Israel can't afford to lose anything. And that is a fact of life. Israel loses once, it's done. Therefore, it can't lose.
And I know, Rabbi, you want to respond to that, but we have to take a first break. We're just getting warmed up. The new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem is our subject tonight, right after we check the first alert weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and joining us for more are Jeff Hunting, Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Sinai, Howard Teblowitz, the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Sarasota and Manatee, and Mark Weston, the author of Prophets to Princes. And we should know we did want to have somebody from the Muslim community here tonight, but it is the beginning of Ramadan. And Rabbi, I know that you wanted to respond to something that, that Howard said earlier about the problem that Israel finds itself in terms of the global PR war.
Well, I think Howard is right in the sense that that's not the be-all and end-all. But there was a time when Israel, incidentally, was winning the PR war. I remember 1967 and 1973, and that was a very, very different time. It can't be avoided sometimes. When you are attacked, you have to respond appropriately, and I think Israel's trying to do that. But maybe the motto should be do no harm. In other words, I really wonder what Israel gained, let's forget the United States, what Israel gained by moving the embassy. First of all, in response to my friend here, Jerusalem has always...
You guys are friends.
We are dear friends. Jerusalem has always been the capital of Israel. Israel decides who the capital is. What we're really talking about is how the world comes together to decide where their embassy is going to be. For instance, the business of international contacts with the Israeli government was always in Jerusalem. If you look at the consulates before the move, they're huge, and that's where the business was because the government of Israel is in Jerusalem. So this really is something else. Again, I think it was much more, and I'll say it, I believe this was much more a decision for Donald Trump's political campaign than it was anything else.
On that note, CNN published an interesting article, and I want to quote from it. It was by Samuel Friedman, who's a professor at Columbia University, and bear with us because this is a little bit long, but he says, in normal circumstances, a consensus of American Jews would have unreservedly cheered the relocation of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which Jews of all stripes regard as the national capital despite international refusal to do so. But the toxic partnership of Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has damaged the bond between Jews here and Jews there. The peace process and the hope of a two-state solution is effectively dead. It now seems that the only options on the table are a binational state, which would provide equal citizenship rights to all Jews and Arabs living between the Jordan River and Mediterranean Sea, and an apartheid regime of Israeli Jews ruling over Palestinian Arabs. Mark, that is what a lot of people are concerned about in terms of that. The perception that Israel is becoming an apartheid state.
Yes, Israel's PR is about to get much worse. And the root of the problem, which was expressed there, is Israel would like to be a democratic state, a Jewish state, and have the West Bank. And it's just can't have all three. It's physically impossible to have all three. It has to choose which two of the three it wants. So if it hangs on to the West Bank, then it has two choices. It can give the Palestinians a vote, in which case it ceases to be a Jewish state, or it can not give the Palestinians a vote, in which case a minority will be ruling a majority. Right now, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, it's still 51% Jewish, 49% Palestinian, but that's changing very rapidly. So within about 2 years, you're going to have a light-skinned minority ruling over a darker-skinned majority. This is approaching South African apartheid. It'll get worse as the years go by, and Israel, really, it's not good for Israel to go in that direction.
So, Howard, a lot of people think, or there are American Jews who think that what is happening today, the position, whether it's of the Trump administration or the Netanyahu government, it works for today. It holds Israel together today, maybe even tomorrow, but what happens a couple of years around when you, instead of the world support in terms of what Israel is doing and its right to exist, the lessons of South Africa and apartheid is not, over the long haul, something that could be sustained.
First of all, I resent the word apartheid because there is no apartheid in Israel, none. So let's start with that as a given. Two, Israel is an independent democratic state. They're going to elect their government, and the government's going to be the government. We elect our own governments here. I don't think over the long haul there is going to be that much change going on, whether it's Democrat or Republican. There's different shades, but I do believe in the long run that is going to be the case. However, yeah, Israel is losing the PR war, but Israel's lost it for years anyway. If we have to rely in Israel on worrying about Europeans or worrying about third world countries, done.
Rabbi?
I think one of the problems is the definition of terms. And that is one is occupation. If in fact Israel continues annexing land upon which Palestinians live on the West Bank, that is not just occupation, that's annexation. Israel is at war. In this way, I'm sure that Howard will agree with me. Like two warring countries, there are rules of war, and one is that you can occupy the land until there's a peace treaty. Nobody in his right mind would blame Israel for continuing a military occupation until the Palestinians sign a peace treaty. What is complicating this is the Israeli government's consistent expansion of settlements on the West Bank. In essence, somebody said it correctly, is two countries fighting over a pizza, and one is eating the pizza. And that's exactly what we have. We don't have apartheid right now. Yes, Israel, within the green line of the 1949 borders, is one of the most democratic of states. In a certain sense, I would say it's even more democratic with a small d as the United States. But if you look at, if Israel becomes, as Mark just said, if it becomes the land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, then keeping a democratic state and a Jewish state is virtually impossible.
I'm wondering if all of you are concerned about the toll that this very debate is taking on the American Jewish community, which, you know, again, you know, you could go back in terms of cliches and talk about American Jews and agreeing on all things, but I think we've all noticed a difference in terms of what's happening inside the congregations, which, you know, politically has really made very intense divisions, you know, in our community.
Yeah, I think it's not just the Israel issue, it's the entire American political scene that's just causing the never-ending angst, not just in synagogues, churches, probably in mosques as well. You cannot have a civil conversation where you disagree. I mean, Jeff and I are good friends, and we disagree, and we're good friends. But I think the whole issue of disagreeing without being disagreeable seems to be the problem right now, and that's just an American issue.
Mark, and we're going to wrap up this conversation, but what is, you know, it seems like the support for what the president is doing and regarding his support for Israel is falling increasingly under political lines, with you know, over 80% of Republicans supporting what the president is doing, but far fewer Democrats, even if they're Jews, supporting the president on these issues.
Yes, and the ceremony at the embassy in Jerusalem was a love fest between U.S. evangelical Christians and Israeli very Orthodox Jews, with very few secular Jews or secular Americans, for that matter, there. So it is now becoming a very partisan issue, and it never used to be. I mean, Americans used to be unanimous about Israel's right to exist. Well, we're still unanimous about that, and its right to protect itself against the Palestinians. But what you were just talking about, the settlements are like a canker sore that irritates the Muslim world and drives young men to become terrorists. And I'm convinced that if Israel and Palestine can ever settle this issue about who governs what, that terrorism will decrease.
You have an interesting joke, which I will allow you to tell.
There was an Israeli intellectual and a Palestinian intellectual, and they were talking about all the problems, and then they said, will there ever be peace here? And they got down on their knees and they prayed, Lord, will there ever be peace in the Middle East? And a voice boomed out of the sky and said, yes, there will be peace here, but not in my time.
Rabbi, I know that you were kind of disturbed by some of the speeches at that ceremony earlier this week by some of the pastors that were invited by the United States government.
On my behalf, I only speak for myself, but I think I speak for a lot of people in our community and elsewhere. I want to thank Mitt Romney for having the courage to say what he said about the people who were invited to that ceremony. Some of the most bigoted, narrow-minded, and hateful people were chosen by our president for the opening of that embassy. These are people who have said that Mormons, Roman Catholics, Muslims, and Jews and gay people were either created in hell or are going there. And I would like to know why that is something that brings peace to the Middle East.
And Howard, let me give you the last word.
Let's just keep hoping that cooler heads are going to prevail in the Middle East and people are going to begin talking to each other.
And that's what it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We want to thank our guests for being here tonight. Jeff Hunting, the Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Sinai, Howard Tevlowitz, the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Sarasota Manatee, and Mark Weston, the author of Prophets and Princes.